Roman soldiers, men trained to follow orders, men trained not to fail, men trained to keep control when everything around them could fall apart. And that night, they had one clear mission: guard a tomb, a sealed tomb, a secured tomb, a tomb protected by direct orders. It was the tomb of Jesus of Nazareth. No one was supposed to come near it. No one was supposed to enter. No one was supposed to touch that place. But then, something happened. Something none of them expected. Something they could not stop. And something they would never be able to explain. Because in a matter of moments, what seemed completely secure suddenly made no sense anymore. And they saw it. This was not a rumor. It was not a story someone told later. They were there, and they knew that what had happened was real. But the most shocking part was not only what happened at the tomb, it was what happened afterward. Because those same soldiers, the very men assigned to guard that place and were given money to change the story, money to stay silent, money to lie. And from that moment on, two versions began to spread. One was what truly happened. The other was the story many people ended up believing. But the question is, why did the news that would change the world have to be hidden at any cost? It all began even before that tomb was sealed, because while the body of Jesus of Nazareth was resting inside the grave, something was deeply troubling the religious authorities. It was not the past. It was not what had already happened. It was what he had said. Because Jesus had stated more than once that on the third day he would rise back to life, Matthew 16:21. And even though many had not believed him at the time, others were not willing to take the risk. So the chief priests and the Pharisees went directly to Pontius Pilate with an urgent request. They said, "Sir, we remember that while he was still alive, that deceiver said, 'After 3 days I will rise again.'" Matthew 27:63. They could not allow that statement to become reality, or worse, for someone to make it look like it had become reality. So they asked for something very specific. "Therefore, command that the tomb be made secure until the third day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away, and say to the people, 'He has risen from the dead.'" Matthew 27:64. Their fear was clear. If the body disappeared, the story would not end there. Something much bigger would begin. And that was when Pilate made the decision that would shape everything that was about to happen. He answered them, "You have a guard. Go your way. Make it as secure as you know how." Matthew 27:65. With that order, everything was placed in the hands of men who did not believe in miracles, but did believe in discipline, authority, and consequences. And so, the tomb was sealed, officially secured, protected under constant watch. Nothing was supposed to go wrong. Nothing was supposed to move. Nothing was supposed to happen. But the very thing those authorities were trying to prevent was already about to take place. The order had already been given, and now everything depended on them. These were not ordinary men, they were Roman soldiers, trained to keep control even in the most critical situations. They were used to standing guard, used to resisting pressure, used to not giving in to fear. And that night, they were standing in front of a tomb they could not afford to lose sight of. The sepulchre had been officially secured, the stone had been placed with precision, and a seal had been set in place as a guarantee that no one would interfere without facing consequences. That seal represented authority. That seal was not supposed to be broken, because breaking it was not only a crime, it was a direct challenge to the power that had ordered it. So this watch was not symbolic, it was constant, it was real. Every movement mattered, every sound could mean something, every moment had to be controlled, and they knew it. They knew that one mistake could cost them their lives. Because in the Roman system, failing a mission was not an option, it was a sentence. So they remained alert, firm, silent, watching a tomb that, from the outside, seemed to have nothing left to offer. A sealed place, motionless. At least that is how it appeared. But that appearance of calm would not last much longer, because while they were guarding what they believed was secure, something was already about to break that order. And then it happened. It was not gradual. It was not something they could prepare for. It came suddenly. A great earthquake shook the place, Matthew 28:2. The ground trembled beneath their feet, breaking the silence of that early morning. And in the middle of that moment, something descended, an angel of the Lord. His appearance was unlike anything ordinary. It was not something anyone could ignore. He was like lightning, and his clothing was white as snow, Matthew 28:3. A presence impossible to mistake, a presence that left no room for doubt. And right there in front of them, the stone was rolled away, not from the inside, not by human hands. It was moved before their eyes. In one single moment, everything that had been secured was no longer secure. And the soldiers reacted, but not like men trained for war, not like guards prepared to resist. They reacted like witnesses standing before something far beyond anything they had ever known. Out of fear of him, the guards trembled and became like dead men, Matthew 28:4. Paralyzed, unable to move, unable to intervene, unable to do anything, because what was happening could not be stopped, it could not be explained, it could not be fought. And in that moment, everything changed. The tomb was no longer secured. Control had been lost. And those men, the ones assigned to prevent any disturbance, had just witnessed something they would never forget. When everything became silent again, nothing was the same. The ground had stopped shaking, the light had broken through, and then the moment had passed. But what remained was impossible to ignore. The stone was no longer in its place. The seal had been broken, and the tomb was open, empty. The body of Jesus of Nazareth was no longer there. Those men had been placed there to prevent exactly that, and now they were standing before the one thing that was never supposed to happen. There were no signs of a struggle, no evidence of human interference, nothing that suggested someone had forced their way in, and yet the body was gone. And they knew it. They knew they had not fallen asleep. They knew no one had come in secretly. They knew what had happened did not fit any logical explanation, but they also knew something else. They were responsible for a tomb that was no longer sealed, responsible for a body that was no longer there, responsible for something they could not explain but would still have to report. And in the system they lived under, that carried a price. Because failing on a Roman watch was not a mistake you simply corrected. It was a mistake you paid for. And in that moment, they were not only trying to process what they had seen, they were facing what would come next. Because what had just happened could not be hidden, but it could not be easily told either. And still, they had to say something. They could not stay there. Not after what they had seen, not after what had happened right in front of them. So some of the guards made a decision. They went into the city, not to run away, not to hide, but to report what had happened, because what had taken place was not something they could handle on their own. So they went directly to the very people who had pushed for that tomb to be guarded in the first place, the chief priests. And behold, some of the guard went into the city and reported to the chief priests all the things that had happened. Matthew 28:11. They did not hide anything. They did not soften the story. They did not reshape it. They told them what had happened. The earthquake, the presence that came down, the stone rolled away, the tomb opened, everything. Because they knew there was no better story to invent than the truth they had actually witnessed. But they also knew that truth would not be easy to handle, because what they were saying did not only explain an empty tomb, it challenged everything the authorities had been trying to prevent. And in that moment, the story was no longer in the soldiers' hands. Now it was in the hands of those who had to decide what to do with it. What those soldiers reported did not fall on indifferent ears. This was not an ordinary report. It was not a situation that could be solved with a simple explanation. It was a threat, a direct threat to everything the authorities had been trying to prevent from the beginning. Because if what those men were saying was true, then the story had not ended at the cross. It was only beginning, and that could not be allowed. So the chief priests did not react immediately. They did not answer impulsively. They gathered together. And when they had assembled with the elders and consulted together, Matthew 28:12. In other words, they deliberated. They thought it through. They weighed what was at stake. Because this was not only about what had happened at a tomb, this was about control, influence, and what the people would believe from that moment on. And then they made a decision, a calculated decision, an intentional decision, a final decision. They gave a large sum of money to the soldiers, Matthew 28:12. This was not symbolic. It was not a small compensation. It was enough money to change a story, to buy silence, to secure a version. And with that money came a clear instruction. Tell them, his disciples came at night and stole him away while we were sleeping. Matthew 28:13. That would be the new narrative. That would be the story they were supposed to tell. It did not matter what had really happened. It did not matter what the soldiers had seen. From that moment on, what mattered was what the people would hear. A designed version, not the truth. And still, it had to be protected, because what was at stake was too great. That is why the authorities added something else, a guarantee, a protection. And if this comes to the governor's ears, we will appease him and make you secure. Matthew 28:14. They knew what that meant. They knew that under Roman law, failing on watch could cost those soldiers their lives. But they also knew they could intervene. They could influence. They could protect those men if they cooperated. And in that moment, everything became clear. The soldiers had two options: tell the truth and face the consequences, or take the money and repeat a story they knew was not true. And then they chose. So they took the money and did as they were instructed. Matthew 28:15. It was not a mistake. It was not confusion. It was a decision that would change the way this story would be told for generations. From that moment on, the story had already been shaped. A version began to spread, an explanation that sounded simple, but could not survive a closer look. Because according to what they were now supposed to say, the disciples had come at night, stolen the body, and done it while the soldiers were sleeping. Matthew 28:13. But that claim had a problem, an obvious problem. If the soldiers were asleep, how could they know what had happened? How could they identify who was responsible? How could they speak with certainty about something that, according to their own version, they never saw? The story did not fit. It was not a description of what happened. It was a narrative built to be believed. And still, it was accepted. Not because it was strong, not because it was coherent, but because it came backed by authority, because it had been pushed by those who held influence, because it was easier to accept than to face the unexplainable. because accepting the truth would mean recognizing something many were not willing to admit. And so, a designed version began to gain strength. And this saying has been commonly reported among the Jews until this day. Matthew 28:15. It was repeated. It was sustained. It became the explanation many people heard. But behind that story, there was still another one. The one those soldiers had seen, the one they could not erase from their memory, the one that had been changed, but never eliminated. Because truth can be hidden, it can be distorted, it can be replaced by another version, but it does not stop being true. And in this case, the difference between those two stories changed everything. And what began as a decision made in secret ended up becoming the version many people accepted without questioning, not as an official announcement, not as a public decree, but as something passed from person to person, as a convenient explanation, as a quick answer to an uncomfortable question: what happened to the body of Jesus of Nazareth? And the answer was already prepared. His disciples came at night and stole him while the soldiers were sleeping. Matthew 28:13. A version easy to repeat, easy to understand, easy to accept, because it did not require faith, it did not require change, it did not require anyone to confront the impossible, and that is why it spread. It was repeated among the people, it was carried into conversations, it became the story many heard the most, and while that version moved forward, the other one was pushed into silence, not because it was not real, not because it had no witnesses, but because it had been replaced, because someone decided what should be told and what should be hidden. And at that point, the story was no longer only about an empty tomb. It was about what people choose to believe, about what they are willing to accept and what they would rather ignore. Because not everyone who heard that version questioned it, and not everyone who repeated it knew what had really happened. But there were some who did know. They had been there. They had seen it. They had experienced that moment. And still, they chose silence in exchange for money and safety. But this story is not only about a group of soldiers. It is not only about what happened at the tomb. It is also about something that still happens today. Because not everyone who knows the truth speaks it. Some people stay silent, sometimes because of fear. Fear of the consequences. Fear of what others may think. Fear of what might change. Other times, because of pressure. Because it is not easy to hold on to the truth when everything around you is pushing in another direction. And sometimes it is simply because of comfort. Because telling the truth costs something. It makes people uncomfortable. It exposes what is hidden. It forces you to take a stand. And it is easier to stay silent. Easier to repeat what everyone else is saying. Easier to avoid conflict. But that does not change reality. Because truth does not stop being truth. Just because it is silenced. Just because it is ignored. Just because it is replaced with another version. And those soldiers knew it. They knew what they had seen. They knew what had happened. But in that moment, they chose something that mattered more to them than the truth. And that is the question this story leaves for us. Not only what they did, but what do we do when we are standing face to face with the truth? Do we hold on to it, even when it costs us? Or do we set it aside so life feels easier? Because there are moments in life when not making a decision is still a decision, and staying silent also has consequences. Because in the end, this story does not end with an empty tomb, and it does not end with a version that was spread among the people. It ends with an invitation to choose. Because Jesus did not only speak about truth, he taught us to live in it. And you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. John 8:32. Not a comfortable truth, not a truth that bends itself around what we want, but a truth that sets us free, even when it confronts us. A truth that transforms us, even when it makes us uncomfortable at first. And today, that same truth is still available, not to be hidden, not to be changed, but to be lived. Because unlike those soldiers, we can choose differently. We can choose not to stay silent. We can choose not to change what is real. We can choose to stand for the truth, even when it is not the easiest thing to do. And if this message spoke to your heart, I want to invite you to respond in a simple but powerful way. Jesus, help me live in your truth, even when it costs me. Write it in the comments. And if you want to keep discovering what the Bible truly reveals, subscribe to the channel. Here we are not just telling stories. We are seeking to understand them and live them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. And keep watching the next video on your screen, because sometimes one truth understood at the right time can change the direction of an entire life. Until next time, may the peace and light of God be with you always,